When we think of the crucifixion of Jesus, we focus on the pain, the sacrifice, the bloodshed. The sky turned black, the earth trembled, and Jesus, the Son of God, took his final breath. But what if I told you there was more to this moment than we've been led to believe? What if the story didn't just unfold between Jesus and the world of men and demons? What if, above all this chaos, there was another battle, silent yet powerful, hidden from most of us? Because there were two angels standing in the gap, witnessing it all, Michael, the commander of heaven's armies, and Uriel, the angel of flame. They didn't just watch from a distance. They stood there. They waited. Their presence changed the course of the battle. But why were these two angels, whose power alone could have shaken heaven, left out of the narrative? And why were they erased from the most important moment in human history? What truth were they guarding? You see, it wasn't just Jesus who was sacrificing that day. The cross was more than a symbol of divine love. It was a reckoning, a moment where the foundations of heaven and earth were laid bare. But in the silence, in the shadows of that moment, these two angels, Michael and Uriel, stood alone. And what they did and what they witnessed was something the world was never meant to see. The question is, why were they really there? What if Uriel wasn't just a passive observer? What if he was the silent flame guarding something we've never been told? What if Michael didn't just stand by as a warrior, but as a witness to the final battle that transcended all the wars between heaven and earth? They weren't just divine spectators. They were divine protectors. And in this moment of ultimate sacrifice, they were standing on the edge of a secret. But what was that secret? What did these angels know about the cross that we haven't been told? Uriel's flame of light was not just the light of revelation. It was a flame of truth, and that truth was about to change everything. He stood in silence, but his silence was full of meaning. And Michael, as the warrior, wasn't simply ready for battle. He was ready to witness what was about to unfold. But his role was not the one we've been taught. It wasn't about fighting at all. It was about waiting. And in the space between heaven and earth, between darkness and light, Michael and Uriel stood at the crossroads of destiny, and their actions might reveal something we've overlooked. Because the battle you never saw wasn't fought with swords or spears. It was fought with silence. It was fought with revelation. And it was fought by two angels who were never meant to be part of the story. So who were these angels? What did they truly witness? And more importantly, why were their roles erased from the Bible, leaving us to only guess what happened in that moment of cosmic significance? The answers might be hidden, but tonight, we're about to uncover them. We know Michael as the angel who leads God's armies, the general of heaven's hosts. His name echoes through history with the sound of victories over demons, the ultimate battle against Lucifer, and his position as a commander, ready to fight at any moment. We think of him as the angel of strength, the angel who stands at the front lines, holding the sword of God in the war between heaven and hell. But what if I told you Michael wasn't the only one standing at the cross? What if there was another angel there, one not wielding a sword or leading an army, but holding something far more powerful? This angel's name is Uriel. We don't hear much about him. In fact, Uriel is one of the most powerful angels in heaven, yet his name is rarely spoken. His story, like a whisper, is often lost in time, barely mentioned in the Bible we know. We hear the tales of Gabriel, Michael, even Raphael, but Uriel remains in the background, his role in salvation hidden, his power often overlooked. But Uriel was there, at the cross of Jesus, standing alongside Michael, in that moment when heaven itself seemed to tremble. The question is, why Uriel? What was the role of this quiet, powerful angel at the cross when the fate of the world hung in the balance? Why was Uriel the one chosen to stand next to Michael in the most crucial moment of human history? Unlike Michael, who was ready to fight, ready to battle, Uriel's presence wasn't about conflict. It wasn't about strength or violence. Uriel's flame was a different kind of power. A silent flame, a revealing light. What Uriel carried wasn't a sword of destruction. It was a light that didn't burn with rage but with truth. His light exposed the depths of what was happening on the cross, not with words, not with actions, but through sheer presence. While Michael stood ready to fight, Uriel stood in quiet witness. Michael's role was to protect, to fight the forces of darkness. But Uriel, his role was to reveal, to make clear the truth of the moment. Because sometimes truth doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't need to be forced. It just needs to be seen. Uriel's silence, his stillness, became just as powerful as any sword Michael could wield. In the moment of the ultimate sacrifice, Uriel's presence carried an unspoken truth that no other angel could reveal. His flame of truth wasn't one that burned the world. It was a flame that illuminated it. It's easy to think of the cross as just a place of suffering, but Uriel understood that it was far more than that. It was the moment of revelation, the place where everything that had been hidden in darkness was finally brought to light. And Uriel, the angel of flame, was the one who held the light in that moment. But what truth was he revealing? What did Uriel see at the cross that we haven't been shown? We know Michael was there to protect. He was the warrior, the one who stood ready to defend heaven's creation. But Uriel was there for a much quieter purpose. He was there to bear witness to the ultimate sacrifice, to the end of sin, to the beginning of salvation. His role wasn't to fight, it was to watch, to understand, and to hold the truth. And maybe that's why his name is barely spoken in our modern Bibles. Because what Uriel held, what he revealed, wasn't meant for everyone to know just yet. It was a truth too powerful for mankind to fully understand in that moment. The world wasn't ready to hear it. But Uriel wasn't there to force the truth. He was there to let it unfold quietly in its own time. As the darkness fell over the cross and the veil of the temple was torn, Uriel stood at the edge of creation, waiting. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He watched. He let the world see what was happening, because that was his power, not to act, not to intervene, but to let the truth be seen. Maybe that's why Uriel has been so quietly erased from history, because the truth he carried was too powerful and too simple to be spoken in the noise of our world. And perhaps the reason Uriel's flame still burns is because the truth he revealed at the cross, the truth of salvation, has never truly been understood. So why does this matter now? Why does Uriel's role in this moment of history matter when it feels like so much time has passed? Because the story of Uriel and the cross is a story that still echoes today. In every moment when you face the darkness, when you feel overwhelmed by the world's troubles and lies, remember Uriel. His flame wasn't one of destruction. It was a light that exposed the truth when no one else could. And maybe, just maybe, we're still walking in Uriel's light. A light that doesn't rage, doesn't shout, but simply reveals. Lucifer, the name alone carries with it a weight of dread. He was the morning star, the highest of the angels, the most beautiful, the most powerful, the one who had once held the favor of God. He was created to be the light bearer, to illuminate the heavens, to lead in glory. But something changed. His pride began to grow, and it became the spark for his fall from heaven. His rebellion was about more than power. It was about control, about the desire to be worshipped, to be seen as greater than the Creator. He wasn't just challenging authority, he was challenging truth itself. We know of Lucifer's eventual defeat at the hands of Michael, the warrior of heaven. Michael's sword, forged in divine fire, cleaved through Lucifer's arrogance, casting him down. But that sword wasn't the only thing Lucifer feared. There was something more. Something that terrified him more than any weapon or army. It was the presence of Uriel's flame. Uriel, the angel who stands in the shadows, silently revealing the truth that others refuse to see. The one whose flame of divine light burns not to destroy, but to expose, to shine a light in the darkness of deception. Uriel was the angel who saw through the lies Lucifer had woven for so long. And Lucifer knew this. Lucifer had always been the deceiver. He had mastered the art of hiding his true nature, of making himself appear as the light bringer, the beautiful one. He cloaked his rebellion in righteousness, hid his pride beneath the guise of wisdom, and seduced countless angels to follow him. But Uriel saw him for who he truly was. Uriel wasn't just an angel of fire. He was the keeper of hidden knowledge, the one who held the truths of the universe that others were not meant to understand. While Michael fought with his sword, with brute strength, Uriel fought with something far more terrifying. He fought with the truth. Truth in many ways is more dangerous than any weapon. It cannot be hidden. It cannot be ignored. It does not bend to will or circumstance. It simply is. And Lucifer feared it. He feared being exposed, for once his deception was revealed, it would all fall apart. His grand rebellion, his plan to overthrow God, his lies to the angels, all of it would be laid bare. And Lucifer, in all his pride, couldn't bear the thought of being seen for what he truly was. He could hide in the shadows no longer. The truth was coming, and it was Uriel's flame that would reveal it. But Uriel didn't just stand there with a light for the sake of lighting the way. No, Uriel's flame burned with purpose. It shined through the deepest darkness, cutting through the veils of deception, revealing the true nature of things. Lucifer, the once brilliant angel, could no longer mask his true intentions. Uriel wasn't just exposing Lucifer's pride, he was exposing the core of rebellion itself. Lucifer wasn't just rejecting authority, he was rejecting the very nature of truth. And that, more than anything else, was unforgivable. Uriel's role wasn't to fight Lucifer physically, as Michael did. Uriel's role was to show Lucifer's true self, to reveal his deception, to burn away the lies that had been built up over eons. And that kind of revelation was far more dangerous than any battle of blades. It is said that Uriel's flame was so bright that even the darkest corners of heaven trembled. The truth he carried wasn't just a simple light. It was a power that couldn't be denied, a truth that couldn't be hidden. It was the kind of truth that would expose everything, every lie, every sin, and every falsehood. Lucifer, who had so carefully cultivated his image as the lightbringer, couldn't bear being unmasked. He couldn't bear being shown for what he was, a fallen angel consumed with pride, longing to be greater than God. This is why Uriel terrified him. It wasn't just the fire. It was the truth the fire revealed. Uriel's flame cut through Lucifer's mask, burning away his false image, revealing the monster beneath. Imagine the fear that must have gripped Lucifer's heart as he faced Uriel. For the first time, he could no longer hide. There was no more pretending, no more convincing others of his righteousness. Uriel held the power to expose Lucifer for what he truly was, and that was a power that no angel, not even the mighty Lucifer, could control. But why did Uriel, who was so willing to stand in that truth, not act against Lucifer immediately? Why didn't he strike? Maybe the answer lies in the role Uriel was meant to play, not to destroy, but to witness. Uriel was there to witness the moment when light faced light, to stand in the face of rebellion, not to fight, but to reveal the truth. Sometimes truth is the most dangerous weapon of all, because once it is revealed, it cannot be unlearned and it cannot be undone. This was Uriel's power, not to act, but to hold the light and let that light do its work. Uriel wasn't the angel who destroyed darkness. He was the angel who exposed it. And that, in itself, was the greatest weapon against Lucifer's lies. As Jesus hung on the cross, the world was plunged into darkness. The very sky above the earth seemed to tremble and shudder under the weight of what was happening. The earth itself groaned as it bore witness to the ultimate sacrifice, the Son of God dying for the sins of the world. But this was no mere human act of suffering. This was the ultimate clash of light and darkness, a battle that spanned the realms, shaking both heaven and earth. It was a battle not just of flesh and blood, but of spiritual forces that had been at war since the beginning of time. Lucifer had fallen, taking many angels with him. Adam and Eve had tasted the forbidden fruit, and death and sin entered the world. But now at the cross of Jesus, all of it, every lie, every sin, every act of rebellion, was about to meet its end. And standing at the very heart of this cosmic struggle, just out of view, were two of heaven's most powerful angels, Michael and Uriel. Uriel, the silent flame, stood on the edge of heaven's glory, watching the world unfold below him. His role was not to act, not yet. His purpose was to witness, to bear witness to the moment when creation itself would be reconciled to its creator. He stood, not in power but in presence. Uriel didn't need to raise a sword. His mere existence in that moment was enough to hold the balance of heaven and earth. As the flames of his divine light flickered softly in the distance, Uriel was there not just to observe but to seal the final judgment, the moment when the unseen battle for the souls of mankind would reach its climax. And then there was Michael, the warrior of heaven. Michael stood at the threshold of the battle, his massive wings poised for flight. He was ready to fight, prepared to do whatever it took to protect heaven's plan. But despite his power, despite his readiness, Michael didn't move. He remained standing, his gaze fixed on the cross, his sword still. What we rarely talk about is the fact that neither Michael nor Uriel intervened, not because they were powerless, not because they didn't have the strength to act, but because the true victory was already unfolding before their eyes. The real battle wasn't one of swords or fire. It was in the quiet act of sacrifice that Jesus was offering for all of humanity. Michael stood, poised, prepared to fight, but he didn't need to. The battle was already won. In that act of surrender, in that ultimate act of love, the war between light and darkness was about to reach its conclusion, not in violence but in sacrifice. Uriel's flame didn't need to burn brighter. The truth was already being revealed. His silence spoke more powerfully than any sword or flame could. His presence, his quiet understanding, was enough to carry the weight of the moment. The sacrifice of Jesus on the cross was the final step in the redemption of the world, and no force could change that. What happened at the cross was not just a victory over sin, but a victory over all the forces of darkness that had been at work since Lucifer's fall. Jesus, in his sacrifice, overcame death itself, sealing the fate of the enemy. And Michael, standing ready, knew that his time to strike would not come in that moment. The moment of victory had already passed. Uriel and Michael, two of heaven's most powerful angels, stood silent and still, not because they lacked the strength to act, but because the battle was no longer theirs to fight. The true power was not in strength or fire, but in the humble sacrifice of Jesus. The ultimate victory was already won in that moment. There was no need for more war. The price had been paid. The cross was where the greatest victory in history took place, not in the might of angels, but in the sacrifice of God's own Son. And Michael and Uriel, standing silently, held the balance of heaven's glory as the truth unfolded before them. But why did they do nothing? Why didn't Michael unsheath his sword and strike down the forces of evil once and for all? Why did Uriel not ignite his flame to consume the darkness? Because sometimes the greatest power is found in silence. The ultimate victory wasn't won by force. It was won by surrender. Jesus didn't need an army or an angel to fight for him. His victory was in laying down his life. It was the greatest act of love ever witnessed. And Uriel and Michael, knowing the truth, stood in reverence of that moment. They held the space as heaven wept, watching the most powerful act of love and sacrifice the universe had ever known. We often talk about Michael's victory, don't we? We know the stories of the great battles he fought, of the armies he led, and how he faced off against Lucifer and his forces time and time again. But what about Uriel? Why was he there, standing beside Michael at the most crucial moment in human history, yet so easily overlooked? Uriel, the angel of flame, the one who carries the divine fire of truth, was present at the cross. Yet somehow we barely hear of him in the grand narrative. Why was he there in the most sacred of moments? And why has his role in that moment been almost erased from history? Could it be that Uriel's role wasn't as simple as we've been led to believe? What if Uriel wasn't just a passive observer, quietly standing beside Michael, waiting for the battle to unfold? What if Uriel had a much deeper purpose that we've yet to truly understand? When we talk about angels, we often focus on their actions, the wars they fought, the battles they won. But Uriel's role was different. Uriel's role wasn't to fight, it was to witness and to hold the truth. While Michael prepared for battle, ready to protect heaven's plan, Uriel stood silent and still, holding the very truth that would ensure Lucifer's rebellion could never win. His flame wasn't one of destruction, it was a flame of revelation. A flame that would burn away the seas through illusions in the darkness that had been allowed to grow in heaven and on earth. Uriel knew. He knew the end from the beginning. He understood what was happening at the cross in a way that no one else could. He wasn't there to stop the darkness. He was there to witness it, and to ensure that the truth would never be hidden again. Maybe that's why Uriel's role at the cross has been so silently erased from history. Maybe his role was so powerful, so divine, that it couldn't be fully understood at the time. Maybe his purpose was too great to be told in the traditional narratives. Because what Uriel saw and what Uriel held at the cross was not just about judgment or sacrifice. It was about purpose. It was about wisdom. And it was about the final strategy of God's plan for the world. The crucifixion wasn't simply about the death of a man. It was about the end of sin, the closing of the door to Lucifer's rebellion, and the reconciliation of the world back to its creator. But Uriel wasn't just a passive bystander in that story. No, Uriel was an active player in the divine drama that unfolded on the cross. His flame was the final seal, the last sign of God's truth, keeping the rebellion from spreading further. It was Uriel's silent witness that would ensure Lucifer's lies would never take root again. Uriel didn't need to fight. The truth he carried was enough. Think about it. Why wasn't Uriel given the spotlight like Michael? Why was his role in that moment downplayed, almost erased? Perhaps because the truth he carried was too much for the world to handle at that time. Uriel's flame wasn't meant to be shared until the world was ready. And even now, we struggle to understand the magnitude of his role in the ultimate plan of salvation. But if we look closely at Uriel's actions, his role becomes clear. Uriel stood at the cross to hold the balance, to preserve the truth that Lucifer's rebellion would never truly win. He didn't fight in the traditional sense. He didn't wield a sword or raise his voice. He simply stood, silently, burning with divine truth. His flame, the light of Boaz, was the last safeguard against the darkness that Lucifer had tried to spread. And Michael was the warrior. He was the one prepared to act, to protect, to fight if necessary. But Michael didn't fight that day because the victory had already been won. The battle was not for strength, it was for truth. And that truth was being revealed in the ultimate act of love and sacrifice, the death of Jesus on the cross. Uriel's role was to hold that truth steady, to preserve it in a world that had become consumed by lies. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to witness, to ensure that the truth would be remembered and never erased again. In that moment of ultimate sacrifice, both Michael and Uriel played a crucial role, but in different ways. Michael's strength would have been a necessity if the battle had come to a head, but it never did. Uriel's silent flame, however, sealed the victory of truth over rebellion, of light over darkness, of God's will over Lucifer's pride. The truth about Uriel and Michael at the cross is one of the most hidden mysteries of the Bible. But when we begin to uncover it, we realize that there's so much more to the story than just judgment. There's purpose, there's wisdom, there's a divine strategy in place that the world isn't ready to see. But if we open our eyes and look closely at Uriel's role, at Michael's role, we begin to understand that these angels weren't passive observers. They were active players in the divine drama that unfolded at the cross, and their actions still echo in the world today. When we think of the cross, we often focus solely on the physical suffering, the pain that Jesus endured, the blood that was shed, and the overwhelming weight of the sacrifice. But what if I told you there is more to the story than just what happened on the cross? What if, in the midst of the darkness that fell over the world, there was a hidden presence, a quiet flame of truth that kept watch over the very fate of humanity? Uriel, the angel of flame, the silent guardian of truth, stood at that very moment, not to speak, not to act, but to hold the balance. His presence was not one of action, not one of force, but of silent power. The world was full of noise, the cries of the dying, the mocking of the crowds, the suffering of the Son of God. But Uriel's role wasn't to add to the noise. His was a quiet witness, a steady flame, reminding the universe that even in the midst of chaos, there was still order, still truth. His flame wasn't one that could burn or consume, it was one that could only reveal. And Michael, standing by, was ready. The warrior angel, armed with strength and resolve, ready to engage if necessary. But Michael too knew that the time had not yet come to fight. His strength was held in reserve, waiting for the moment when heaven's plan would be revealed in its entirety. He stood at the threshold, sword drawn, waiting for the truth to be revealed. Both angels, so often overshadowed by the more well-known figures in biblical history, played an indispensable role that day. The battle between heaven and hell was not won by swords or armies. It was won by truth, and that truth was revealed at the cross. The silence of Uriel and the watchful presence of Michael were more than just passive acts. They were the divine sentinels, guarding the balance between light and darkness, between heaven and earth. In that moment, they were holding the line, waiting for the moment when it was clear, when all would see the victory of God's plan, not by force but by sacrifice. The power of their role isn't in the act of fighting, but in the quiet strength they brought in their silence, in their willingness to stand watch until the moment was right. We may never fully understand the depth of their role, the weight of their presence, but we can reflect on the fact that even in the silence, there is a power that holds the universe together, a power that doesn't shout or demand attention, but that remains steady and true in the darkest of times. And so, as we reflect on the cross, think not just of Jesus and the ultimate sacrifice he made for us. Think also of the unseen forces that were there, watching, protecting, and revealing. The heavens were watching, and Uriel's flame still burns. It reminds us that sometimes the most powerful forces are the ones that don't need to act, don't need to fight, but instead hold the line in silence, holding the balance until the truth can finally be revealed to all. Uriel didn't speak at the cross, he didn't act, he simply stood. And that, in its own way, was the greatest act of power. It's the lesson of his flame. That truth revealed quietly can burn brighter than any fire, changing everything in its path. The next time you reflect on the cross, remember that it wasn't just Jesus' sacrifice that changed the world. It was the divine presence of angels like Uriel and Michael, holding the balance of truth, silently ensuring that heaven's plan would unfold exactly as it was meant to. Their story may not be widely known, but it's there, in the quiet spaces between the chaos of this world. And perhaps that's the way it's meant to be.